So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I think is the optimal setup for the San Juan. And the San Juan is a big river. It flows with a good rate of flow, and you can expect to make casts that are between 10 to 15 feet, 20 feet, maybe longer if you're fishing dries or streamers. So it's also a river where we fish small flies and small tippet, and I mean like 22, 24, 26 with 5.5x, 6x tippet. So you need to be able to cast a rig that has an indicator, weight, 2 flies. So it has to be stiff enough to be able to cast that stuff, but you have to have a rod that's soft enough so that it can absorb the blows of the fish that are fighting and running on 5x, 5.5x, 6x tippet. So it's kind of a hard middle of the road rod that does everything. It's hard to pinpoint what kind of rod it is, but if I had to go with one rod, it would be a 10-foot 4-weight rod for this river. Of course, it's a little bit hard to find 10-foot rods, but 10-foot rods will make your life a whole lot easier when it comes to mending and casting. I fish almost all 10-foot, 10.5-foot rods myself. 10-foot 4-weight rod or 9-foot 4-weight rod with a floating line. You're going to use your floating line 100% of the time when you're fishing here, unless you're fishing with streamers. And a 9-foot 4X leader. Or I have leaders that I build that are not tapered as much, that will cut through the water. Those leaders I use most 99% of the time. But if you're going to buy a rig at a store, if you're going to bring one to the San Juan, 9-foot 4-weight or 9-foot 5-weight rod, floating line that floats really well. Make sure and clean it before you come. All it takes is a microfiber, a couple of passes through a microfiber cloth, no detergent, just water, and you'll get all that grime off, and it'll help to float your fly line higher. 9-foot or 10-foot 4-weight, 5-weight rods, floating line, and a 9-foot 4X leader. And then on top of that, you're going to add either 4.5X or 5X tippet to your first fly, and then you're going to add 5X, 5.5, 6X to your second fly, and then your weight is going to be about a foot. And I'll go over that in more depth. But as far as gear to bring, that's the rod and reel setup that you want to bring. Reels aren't just something that holds fly line. I wish the old timers hadn't said you don't need a reel. I can do a click and pawl drip reel, and I can palm it a lot better than you can with a disc drag system, and you can't. There's no way. I've been fishing tens of thousands of hours, and I'm not as good at palming a reel and getting it sensitive as this Galvin reel is. So you spend a lot of money on certain components to make sure that they work well. And fly reels, it's not that you have to spend a lot of money, but make sure and get one that has a disc drag with a lot of settings. You don't want to have it go a couple of twists and then all of a sudden it's too tight, because what's going to happen is you're fighting a fish, it's running, it's taking too much line out, your drag is too soft, or it's too tight. You go to adjust it and it adjusts so fast, you're fighting the fish, you're not paying attention. It adjusts so fast that it's too tight or too loose, and all of a sudden you lose the fish. Get a quality reel that has a disc drag system with a lot of indents, a lot of choices as far as how tight and how loose the drag is. I like Galvin reels. The people are really good. They're from California, made in the USA, and bulletproof reels. That's all I fish in all of my stuff. But there are a bunch of different reels out there that are good reels and doesn't have to cost a lot of money. So another thing that you're going to need for sure is waders. The water comes out of that dam at about 180 feet below the surface, 160 feet. And it's always cold. Sunlight doesn't penetrate that deep. It's always 41, 42, 42.5, 43 degrees. So you're going to want waders, and even in the summer, you might want to have something underneath to keep your legs warm. Super, super good wool socks. And I mean like better than the Smart Wool thin kind of wool socks. Something big and thick. I use them from Cabela's, and I get them up to my knees so I can keep sort of my lower leg warm, because most of the time when I'm wading, I'm just in from mid-thigh down to my toes, so it's an extra layer on the coldest part of my body. Good socks, waders. I don't think that waders make a difference. Just get a good pair that fit you well, that aren't going to leak. And when you bring your wading boots, this is super important. if you plan on wading on the San Juan, the river has Didymo moss, which is super thick, like a carpet. But when it's on the sandstone, it's like being on an ice skating rink. It's super, super slick. So with your wading boots, you want to have rubber. I tell people to get rubber over felt 100% of the time, because felt transports parasites and worms and other kinds of species that you don't want to bring from one river to the other river, whirling disease, the spore. So you want to have your wading boots with rubber bottoms and studs, either studs that you screw in, studs that already come in the sole, but it has to have studs on it. It'll make your life a whole lot easier. Wading boots with studs for the San Juan, and a wading staff. There are companies that make them. Sims makes a really nice one. That's what I use. But people who go to your thrift shops around town and look for those hiking poles, those are just as good. And the hiking poles are adjustable. Doesn't matter how tall you are, how short you are, you can adjust that hiking pole, as long as make sure that the hiking pole has a little metal stud on the end so it can cut through the moss, so that when you put your your wading staff down, it cuts through the moss and it grabs on you. So rubber soles with studs and a wading staff save your life. If you go, it's not a dangerous river, but if you go in the water and it's not August and July when it's hot and it's 42 degrees, it's gonna soak you and cool your core temperature down so fast that your day's gonna be ended. And if it's not, you're gonna be miserable for the rest of your day. So you really want to mitigate the chances of you falling in the river during your trip, especially in the winter. If you fall in the river, your day's done.